states and non-centralized societies in Central and Southern Africa. In the southern half of the African continent, from the Great Basin of the Congo River to the Cape of Good Hope, states formed somewhat more slowly than in the north. Until the 11th century CE, most of the peoples in this region lived in what are sometimes called non-centralized societies, characterized by autonomous villages organized by clans and ruled by a local chieftain or clan head. Beginning in the 11th century in some parts of southern Africa, these independent villages gradually began to consolidate. Out of these groupings came the first states. The Congo River Valley. One area where this process occurred was the Congo River Valley, where the combination of fertile land and nearby deposits of copper and iron enabled the inhabitants to enjoy an agricultural surplus and engage in regional commerce. Two new states in particular underwent this transition. Sometime during the 14th century, the Kingdom of Luba was founded in the center of the continent, in a rich agricultural and fishing area near the shores of Lake Kissel. Luba had a relatively centralized government in which the king appointed provincial governors who were responsible for collecting tribute from the village chiefs. At about the same time, the Kingdom of Congo was formed just south of the mouth of the Congo River on the Atlantic coast. These new states were primarily agricultural, although both had a thriving manufacturing sector and took an active part in the growing exchange of goods throughout the region. As time passed, both began to expand southward to absorb the mixed farming and pastoral peoples in the area of modern Angola. In the drier grassland area to the south, other small communities continued to support themselves by herding, hunting, or food gathering. A Portuguese sailor who encountered them in the late 16th century reported, quote, "These people are herdsmen and cultivators. Their main crop is millet, which they grind between two stones or in wooden mortars to make flour. Their wealth consists mainly in their huge number of dehorned cows. They live together in small villages, in houses made of reed mats, which do not keep out the rain," end quote. Zimbabwe. Farther to the east, the situation was somewhat different. In the grassland regions immediately to the south of the Zambezi River, a mixed economy involving farming, cattle herding, and commercial pursuits had begun to develop during the early centuries of the first millennium CE. Characteristically, villages in this area were constructed inside walled enclosures to protect the animals at night. The most famous of these communities was Zimbabwe, located on the plateau of the same name between the Zambezi and Limpopo rivers. From the 12th century to the middle of the 15th century, Zimbabwe was the most powerful and most prosperous state in the region and played a major role in the gold trade with the Swahili trading communities on the eastern coast. The ruins of Zimbabwe's capital, known as Great Zimbabwe — Zimbabwe simply means stone house in the Bantu language — provide a vivid illustration of the kingdom's power and influence. Strategically situated between substantial gold reserves to the west and a small river leading to the coast, Great Zimbabwe was well placed to benefit from the expansion of trade between the coast and the interior. The town sits on a hill overlooking the river and is surrounded by stone walls, which enclosed an area large enough to hold over 10,000 residents. Like the Inca in South America, the local people stacked stone blocks without mortar to build their walls. The houses of the wealthy were built of cement on stone foundations, while those of the common people were of dried mud with thatched roofs. In the valley below is the royal palace, surrounded by a stone wall 30 feet high. Artifacts found at the site include household implements and ornaments made of gold and copper, as well as jewelry and porcelain imported from China. Most of the royal wealth probably came from two sources: the ownership of cattle and the king's ability to levy heavy taxes on the gold that passed through the kingdom en route to the coast. By the middle of the 15th century, however, the city was apparently abandoned, possibly because of environmental damage caused by overgrazing. With the decline of Zimbabwe in the middle of the 15th century, the focus of economic power began to shift northward to the valley of the Zambezi River. Concerning southern Africa, south of the East African Plateau and the Congo Basin is a vast land of hills, grasslands, and arid desert stretching almost to the Cape of Good Hope at the tip of the continent. As Bantu-speaking farmers spread southward during their final centuries of the first millennium, they began to encounter Neolithic peoples in the area who still lived primarily by hunting and foraging. Available evidence suggests that early relations between these two people in the first millennium BCE were relatively harmonious. Intermarriage between members of the two groups was apparently not unusual, and many of the hunter-gatherers were gradually absorbed into what became a dominantly Bantu-speaking pastoral and agricultural society that spread throughout much of southern Africa during the first millennium CE. Two such peoples were the Khoi and the San. The two were related because of their language, known as Khoisan, distinguished by the use of clicking sounds. The Khoi were herders, while the San were hunter-gatherers who lived in small family communities of 20 to 25 members throughout southern Africa, from Namibia in the west to the Drakensberg Mountains near the southeastern coast. Archaeologists have studied rock paintings found in caves throughout the area in their efforts to learn more about the early life of the San. These multicolored paintings, which predate the coming of the Europeans, were drawn with a brush made of small feathers fastened to a reed. They depict various aspects of the San's lifestyle, including their hunting techniques and their religious rituals. And so we have two peoples coming together, the Khoi and the San, and they became related because of their language known as Khoisan. Is Africa a continent without a history? Until the second half of the 20th century, the prevailing view among Western historians was that Africa was a continent without a history, a land of scattered villages isolated from the main currents of world affairs. But in the decades after the end of the Second World War, a new generation of historians trained in African studies, spurred on in part by the appearance in 1959 of Basil Davison's path-breaking work, Lost Cities of Africa, began to contest that view. Their studies have demonstrated that throughout history, not only were many African societies, villages, communities actively in contact with people beyond their shores, but also that they created a number of advanced civilizations of their own. Although the paucity of written sources continues to be a challenge for historians, other sources have been used with increasing success in order to throw light on the African historical experience. African peoples were at the forefront of the agricultural revolution in the 9th and 8th millennia BCE, and although some parts of the continent remained isolated from the main currents of world history, and many of which never even had writing, a number of other African societies began as early as the first millennium CE to play an active role in the expanding global trade network, which stretched from the Mediterranean Sea deep into the Sahara. Another major commercial trade route ran from the Arabian Peninsula down the coast of East Africa along the shores of the Indian Ocean. Thus, it is finally becoming increasingly cogent that from the dawn of history, the peoples of Africa have made a significant contribution to the human experience.